Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're looking at today is really effective feedback. So looking at HR strategies for empowering leaders and teams. And so we're going to take some time today to dive into a few pieces or a few topics around this. And I'd like to make it as interactive as possible. I know we're a smaller group today, so feel free to jump in on the chat, or if you want to come off mute and just share a little bit from your own insights and own experience, would always love to hear from you as well. For those of you that you haven't had an opportunity to be introduced to intuitive performance, for us, we really focus on what we call as whole person performance. And this stems from this belief that organizations thrive when their leaders focus less on the job and more on the people behind the job. And so not only do we kind of focus on that leadership training and development side and offer that leadership coaching, we're also a WeBe Canada certified enterprise. And so for those of you calling in from the US, that's recognized as WBENC as well. So if anyone's looking for any supplier diversity targets, more than happy to chat a little bit more about what that might look like for the coming year. As far as myself, my name is Scott Rust. I'm an ACC coach with the International Coaching Federation. I've facilitated and trained over 2,500 professionals in the realm of leadership, habit development, looking at HR processes and systems within organizations, how you can really look at from a people-focused approach. And I'm also, as I mentioned in the chat, the co-founder and COO at Intuitive Performance. And so I'd say more in the summer months, you'll likely find me out on my bike. These days it's parked indoors on a trainer. And this used to be a picture of our puppy, but I'll introduce Mila here, who just turned 6 months over the holidays. And so if we hear any screaming in the background, she's just saying hello, just making her presence known. In terms of what we're looking to take away from today, we're going to be looking at, first of all, really uncovering the secrets to framing feedback that is clear, constructive, and really aligned with your company values. So looking at, how can you help support or even coach your leaders in using positive language that helps encourage that growth and improvement. You'll also be looking at discovering the importance of regular feedback and how can we integrate that into our daily operations rather than making it a annual or even semi-annual event. And so we'll delve into a little bit more as to creating a culture where feedback is more continuous and helps drive that development process. And lastly, we'll be looking a little bit more, exploring techniques that help foster empathy in leaders. So ensuring feedback is not just heard, but is actually felt as a two-way conversation. So we'll discuss how empathetic feedback can lead to higher employee engagement, and we'll look at creating more of a positive workplace environment. Thank you, Laura, for joining in with us here today. Feel free to type in the chat, company you're representing and where you're calling in from. Always like to hear from you as well. A couple of housekeeping items. Feel free, again, to put on your video. It's always nice to make these as interactive and engaging as possible. If you have a question, feel free to raise your hand or even just come off mute, just based on the size of group that we have here today. Or otherwise, the chat function is always there. Throw something in the chat. More than happy to take a look at it and help try to answer questions on the flyer as we go through things here. The purpose is really to be here for you and help support you in your role as much as we can, and also leverage the expertise of who's here as well. We love to hear from our participants from their own experiences and get them to share a little bit about the approaches that they're currently using. One thing I do advise though, or I'd like to practice is when we are in group discussions or sharing experiences, really focus on like, what is your experience rather than providing advice or saying, hey, this is what you should do. Talk a little bit more about, hey, like this is what I've done in certain situations. And that creates a little bit more of an easier environment for people to kind of take what they think will be applicable to them and kind of leave the rest. And if you have to step away for a moment, we get it, things happen. Feel free to drop a quick note in the chat. So before we begin, I'd like to just check in with those that are in the room here today. How frequent is feedback being provided within your organization? Is it something that is already done on a daily or even weekly basis? Is feedback more of, when you're doing your either annual reviews or, maybe you're doing quarterly reviews? Why don't we type in the chat? I'd love to hear from you as to what that looks like. And thank you, Alexandra. Yes, she's very cute, which means she can get away with a lot as well. And so how frequent are you noticing from your HR role is feedback kind of being provided by managers or leaders to their team members? So Caitlin here is sharing that it's completely variable. We work with most of the paramedics in the province, so feedback in a clinical sense has been daily, but non-clinical staff is a little bit different. Or she says non-clinical staff can range from daily to yearly depending on the leader. Okay. Alexandria is sharing a little bit, at her firm, I get feedback during my monthly check-ins with my manager. So talking from your own personal experience. And then for our clients, the experience is varied. So some organizations are great at giving feedback in real time. Others don't have that performance management or feedback loop programs yet. Um, but I'll get them there this year. That's some good goals. There you go. Like that, Alexandria. And Janiza is saying right now feedback is being done every 6 to 12 months, but looking to help shorten that and engage more through the year. Okay, so this is helpful because it gives us a little bit of an idea as to what are practices being implemented within each of your organizations. And it seems to be varied, whether it be on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis, all the way up to those, 6 or 12 month check-ins. And so I am curious, would like to also know, how would you like feedback to be improved within your organization? And this will help us kind of maybe understand, what points the presentation or the workshop should we maybe take a little bit more time on understanding or even dive into a little bit further to help support your growth and your leaders and team members' growth while we're at it. And while everyone's typing away, I actually have a stat here I'll share with you. And so it's talking a little bit about, there's a survey that was conducted, and nearly 60% of survey participants said they would prefer feedback to be either daily or weekly. And when we're actually looking at workers that are under the age of 30, so I assume that's probably more the Generation Z, this number rises to 72%. And so this is a bit of an important stat in the sense that, it's one thing to consider to think about your organization, how frequently you deliver feedback to your teams. Otherwise, a few things that are coming up in the chat here is, Kaylin mentioned, would love to see improvements in frequency, detail, and proactivity in feedback. Yes, not making feedback something that has to always be organized, but rather, being proactive and making it more of a continuous process. Fantastic. Janiza is saying, start implementing stay and exit interviews. Okay, there we go. And Alexandria, weekly feedback is where it's at. I coach managers have feedback conversations in their weekly or bi-weekly one-on-ones. Yes, there's one thing I know about, especially those one-on-ones, is not just falling back into those, what is the tasks we're working on, but rather as a manager, how am I supporting you? How are you meeting expectations? And also vice versa, giving the opportunity to hear feedback from your individual contributor as to what they expect from you as a manager and how you can help improve. So I think those are all fantastic ways of providing and getting more feedback there. Perfect. So the first thing I want to touch on here is looking a little bit around constructive communication. And so when we're looking at constructive communication, um, we're going to dive a little bit more deeper into, how teams communicate and the impact of open communication in teams actually achieving their goals. And so one of the things that come up around that is, teams with open communication are 50% more likely to achieve their goals. I'm sure that doesn't come as any surprise to you. But what is the impact when we can actually have clear, constructive feedback that aligns with our values? And so a few of the things you might be able to notice is that it really becomes a cornerstone of a positive workplace culture. It fosters a workplace environment where people feel heard, valued, and even motivated to contribute their best when feedback aligns with core values. So it helps to kind of shape that individual growth, but also helps strengthen the collective fabric of your organization. The more that you can talk about your core values, whether it's in the feedback or even other conversations, the easier it becomes more ingrained within your company culture. Another piece of this is also looking at delivering feedback in a constructive manner. So ensuring that it's effective in how it's being delivered and also how it's being received. And so looking at supporting your managers and leaders with how they're providing feedback from that perspective can really help improve that individual and team personal and professional growth. Also looking at, leaders as mentors have the power to shape culture at your organization. So by coaching them with positive language and providing them with those types of resources can actually help enable them to inspire and uplift their teams. So they become not just evaluators, but rather facilitators of growth. So they're not always saying, what are you doing wrong? What are you doing right? But rather, here is how you can grow, and they can help facilitate that growth within employees and individuals. And lastly, here, I think I've touched it already, your core values really help serve as a compass for actions within the organization. And so when feedback aligns with values, it becomes much more of a powerful tool to reinforce and live your organizational principles. So it's not just what is being said, but also aligns with the essences of who we are and how we show up and act. So I'll pause here for a moment. I'm going to welcome Christina to the webinar as well. Thanks for jumping in here. And any comments on this or the impact that you may have noticed of constructive communication before we move on? I think as HR professionals, it's pretty standard, and we're pretty well aware of how the impact of this types of communication. So why don't we look a little bit further as to what are some strategies you might be able to utilize to help support leaders in adopting constructive feedback? So one of the things you'll be looking at is providing training, development, or even coaching. I mean, you can't blame your leadership team for not providing effective feedback if they never receive the tools or the knowledge or experience on how to do it effectively. So by providing or offering training programs focused on effective feedback delivery, giving them resources or even tools, or even coaching sessions, for example, can be a great way of helping them learn how to provide effective feedback that will have a positive impact on my team members. Another piece that comes up here is looking at promoting feedback culture guidelines. So actually creating guidelines around what does feedback look like within our organization. And so, fostering a culture where feedback is not only accepted but encouraged can help, can be helped when you develop clear guidelines from an HR role. So that's looking like setting objectives and goals around giving feedback. It's identifying, who should deliver and receive it, as well as a process and channels that can be used for creating more of a feedback culture. Yeah, let's come back to that question around feedback culture at the end of this slide, Kayla, and I'll actually open up to the floor. I'd like to hear what others have to say about that as well. Other things that we can look at is, sharing examples, recognizing and rewarding feedback skills. And so sharing examples of what constructive feedback looks like can really be helpful. It really helps people managers understand how do you implement it for myself. And also acknowledging and rewarding leaders who demonstrate exceptional feedback skills is another way of reinforcing the importance of providing effective feedback as an organization as a whole. The fourth section we have here is looking a little bit at providing regular check-ins and feedback surveys. And so this can help encourage leaders to have more regular check-ins with their teams. I know when we asked the question at first, like what's the current frequency, it was a range of, weekly, monthly, to even every 6 or 12 months. So from an HR perspective, it's up to you to decide like, hey, well, what does regular check-ins look like? And are they always performance reviews, or how do we make feedback a little bit more regular within our organization? What does that look like? And another piece of being able to evaluate how these things are going can be looking at feedback surveys as a way of better understanding how feedback is currently being received within an organization, and even getting feedback from your own role and your own work that your initiatives that you're implementing within the organization. Lastly, addressing resistances and challenges. So I'd like to hear, maybe type yes in the chat or give me a thumbs up. I know we have an emoji function here as well. How often have you heard, I'm too busy, I don't have time, when it comes to mentoring or supporting employees' growth? Especially in organizations that are working within a fast-paced culture, a lot of times managers can fall back on focusing just on the tasks rather than, helping support employee growth or delegating effectively or providing the feedback that's required to be able to, support an employee in doing a specific role. So Geneva says yes way too many times, right? Alexandria raises her hand. Exactly. I mean, I think we've all see it and experience it. The idea here is, well, how can we take a step back and address some of these resistances, address some of these challenges that come up, and help really show managers like what are the long-term benefits of making the time to provide feedback. And if they don't know how, again, finding ways of providing them training, development, coaching, anything along those lines to help support their growth. And Caitlin's adding here, I have bigger fires to put out. And I think, that's a great example, if you're hearing that from a manager or leader as to, well, how much do they prioritize their team's growth or taking the time to actually manage or lead their team? Recognizing, as a manager, a lot of your role is supposed to actually be supporting your team. And, I say that with a grain of salt, understanding that sometimes managers and leaders are overloaded with the amount of things they have to do, right? And what happens is that getting the things done tends to take priority over supporting those that need to help get it done as well. And so I do want to come back to Caitlin's question a little bit earlier. She asked, what does a feedback culture look like in practice? And so I'd like to open up the floor here to the rest of the team and hear a little bit from yourself as to, what does a feedback culture look like to you in your organization? Would anybody be willing to come off mute and share a little bit from their experience? Alexandria?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. So I think your feedback loop is dependent upon your culture and your values. But what I've seen work pretty well, both when I was in-house leading HR and now with clients, is training managers on like the best practices for making feedback no big deal, and then giving them the language and examples of how to deliver different types of feedback, whether it's positive, whether it's constructive, whether it's like something that will bring tension and awkwardness, and then having them bake that into their one-on-ones with their team members. And just have that be part of like even their one-on-one docs. So like with one of my clients, because I have people that report directly to me, we have kind of like a start, stop, continue section in all of our one-on-one docs, where we can leave feedback for each other. We can give, and we're also giving each other progress updates. So I mean, I really think, oh, sorry. And then the other piece of that is I like to integrate values into feedback. So with one of my clients, one of their core values or guiding principles is act with integrity. And so when I'm coaching managers on how to give feedback, I like will use the language from the values in my expectations of their behavior when they're giving feedback, right? Act with integrity. You have to tell someone that they missed their OKRs for Q1. There's a way to do it with empathy, but also with radical candor. And managers need to have the values in the back of their mind when they're giving the harder to hear feedback. But yeah, I think it starts with manager training. Like that's the only way to create a manager troop. And all managers should be clear on the expectations that they have as far as when, where, and how to give feedback to their teams.
I think that was a fantastic description there, Alexandria. And I'll wait for everyone else to vote that Alexandria comes in and gives us all another tutorial around giving feedback within an organization, what a feedback culture looks like. We'll have to bring you in to do a collaborative webinar on that. Kind of recapping what you said, it seems like you touched on a lot of really important points. At a high level, ensuring that there's structures in place to support managers and like giving feedback, then giving them the actual tools, training, and support from like, well, how am I giving feedback, on a one-on-one level, and then ensuring that it's in alignment with your values at the organization, kind of helps make all those three things. And no, that's great. And I see Caitlin here is saying thanks in the chat as well. Did anybody else have anything else to add, I guess, to that as well, that they've noticed within their organization?
I'll chime in. Something that we really had worked on when I was at my corporate experience, which I thought Takeda, I was in pharma quite a bit. So pharmaceutical industry, with Takeda, we did a real good job of making sure that people weren't treated parent to child, that they were all adult to adult. So we really made sure that the conversation wasn't top down. It was really, because we made a very clear culture that we don't hire children. So we hire other adults. So let's have them own their career. And we really changed it that you are really self-directed. So we enabled the employee in general, much more so than just the managers. So whatever the managers were being taught, we made it clear the very next day, guys, your people are going to be seeing the same stuff. So we did a deliberate training curriculum, I'd say, to just equip those future managers at the same time that you are managers. And so that's what I thought it went really well.
Okay, no, that's fantastic, Laura. Thanks for sharing from your experience in pharma and everything else. And again, what I'm hearing there is that idea of being able to have two-way conversations. And to your point, that versus that parent-child, there's manager down to the IC, rather saying, hey, we both can have an empowering conversation and talk about these matters as adults, and kind of find the way forward. All right, thank you. The next thing I want to touch on here, and Alexandria is just jumping in the chat saying manager training is critical, and I love the two-way dialogue. Fantastic. One of the kind of frameworks that we've noticed, recognizing there's lots of ways of providing feedback, or kind of supporting managers that way, is the SBI framework. And so the idea behind this model is, it stands for situation, behavior, and impact. And what we're going to do is we'll take a quick look at the breakdown within a workplace scenario to see how this is actually applied. And so from a context perspective, we're going to look at Alex. He's a team lead and he consistently delegates tasks, which is great, except he does it without clear instructions and it's tending to cause confusion within organizations or within the team members. And so the first component of this is looking at the situation. So I want to be able to describe the situation or the context where the observed behavior occurs. And so this could look like, telling Alex that, hey, at our weekly assignment meetings, you're doing a great job of delegating tasks. So it's really kind of setting the stage as to what we're talking about. This is the situation. The next thing you want to look at is what is the behavior that you're noticing or that you'd like to be able to outline. So outline the observable behavior or action you've noticed in the given situation and ensure that we're being focused and specific more on the facts rather than things that can be interpreted. And so an example of this could be, however, in the last 3 meetings, I've noticed you often provide vague instructions when delegating, and team members have shared that they're confused about your expectations. And so you're sharing a little bit about the experience, we're sticking to the facts. Team members have actually brought this up and have shared it. So it's not, I think team members are feeling this way, I've actually talked to them about it. And then from there, I want to be able to share a little bit more about well, what is the impact of delegating tasks with vague instructions? The lack of clarity really hampers our productivity and team members spend, additional time seeking clarification or executing work that does not align with expectations. And so the SBI framework can be one of the ways in which, you can help your managers better understand as to how they can provide feedback. And then, from there, actually providing actionable improvements. And so one thing that I feel is kind of missing from this is now saying, hey, we've talked about, the feedback and the issue. Now let's talk a little bit one-on-one as to, well, how can we course correct here? And even getting curious and asking the questions to them as to, well, how do you think you might be able to delegate tasks that are a little more clear? What can you do to help improve? And then providing your insight from a management perspective as well. And I see Laura here has mentioned another section here is we call this have a beer. And so behavior, expectation, effect, and results. So again, something similar to this framework. I like the context of have a beer. It helps lighten up the mood around this as well, especially when we're talking about more difficult conversations. And again, it's finding, whatever framework you feel works best for you within your organization. But ensuring, just a way of providing resources to your managers to ensure they know how to do these things rather than leave them in the lurch. Moving on to the next section, we'll talk a little bit about the importance of continuous feedback. And so when we're looking at continuous feedback, let's look at the relationship between employee feedback and disengagement. So I'm sure it comes as no surprise at the bottom here we have, when managers aren't providing any feedback at all, 40% of employees have actually said that they feel disengaged. So I'm not getting the feedback I need within my role. I feel a level of disengagement. When employees are receiving negative feedback, only about 22% of them feel disengaged. However, when we're talking about positive feedback, that number goes down to only 1%. And so what this is really telling us is by providing regular feedback, it really helps increase employee engagement. And I think looking back at the stats here, increases employee engagement by up to 3x. And the goal here isn't saying, hey, just provide positive feedback. Rather, it's a combination of being able to provide both positive and negative feedback in such a way that helps employees' growth and boost their engagement within their role and within their career to help them move forward within their given role. So when we're looking at integrating regular feedback day to day, and Caitlin, this might come back to your question a little bit around, what does continuous feedback look like? Why don't we jump into a few different ways we can do that? So a few things that we can look at is, incorporating feedback during routine meetings. So now Alexandria brought up the fact that, we have something baked in that helps support managers in one-on-ones to be able to provide feedback. So this is part of their actual routine and part of how they show up. And so if you're able to deliver guidelines or help support your managers in such a way that they make feedback part of routine meetings, whether it's one-on-ones or even when it's in team meetings. And the benefits I've noticed within team meetings and providing feedback, again, that doesn't have too much consequence, but rather talking about it from a high level, is that the whole team can be on board as to how we work together and how we want to move things forward. The other thing you want to look at is being able to leverage collaborative platforms, especially if you're working in a hybrid remote environment. And so leveraging digital collaboration tools help facilitate continuous feedback and allowing team members to share insights, updates, feedback in real time as well. And so this could be looking at your HRMS as well and seeing what opportunities there are to be able to do feedback surveys or have that continuous feedback loop. Also looking to encourage peer-to-peer feedback. And so kind of going back to what Laura talked about from, we're all adults here rather than the adult children type of model, it's looking at, the manager isn't the only person that can give feedback. How can we encourage and empower employees to give feedback even to each other in such a way that is empowering rather than disempowering? And what we've noticed is by doing that, it helps bring teams even that much closer together and build that trust and confidence in each other's roles. But again, one thing I will flag around this, it's important to equip people with the right tools to do it. We know how, I'm sure we've all been in a situation that either we've provided or received feedback that maybe didn't land very well, and it can actually cause more harm than it can cause good. And so it's really important to help equip the whole team as to how can you provide effective feedback on its surface. Otherwise, looking at establishing clear communication channels. So even just letting people know, how do we provide feedback? How can we make it easier for team members to share insights, ask questions, provide suggestions? And then finally, integrating feedback into goal setting. Alexandria talked about OKRs. How can you help support me and a team member in such a way that, you're practicing radical candor and sharing how they missed their OKR, but also being empathetic with some of the situations and things that might have come up as well. So being able to integrate that feedback within goal setting and goal reviews can be helpful in helping push the organization forward and help reset expectations from a manager to employee or individual contributor role. I'm going to pause here just for a moment, and I'd like to kind of check in. Out of the 5 pieces that we have here, maybe even just typing in the chat, or if you want to come off mute, let us know which ones do you currently integrate within your organization? Or for Laura, looking back at when you're working in pharma, was there any of these that you felt like was really important to the team?
Oh, I was just reflecting on the pharma experience. I think all of this is pretty normal. As a compensation company, and I have a comp team, we're very transparent. I actually have them tell me, what should I pay you? And I'll make that decision. So it's like give me the rationale, including your performance, and I'll see if I agree. So
okay, there we go. That's really opening the conversation barriers.
it's been that way. I've been in comp for 35 years, so yeah.
All right, there you go. So just checking in on the chat here. So we have Alexandria who would like to integrate number 2 with more clients, but the best platforms are pricey. All right, so helping like leverage collaborative platforms to get feedback from clients.
Yeah.
I hear you, Alexandria. Okay, Caitlin here is saying, I think we can utilize number 3 a lot more effectively. So encouraging the peer-to-peer feedback. And then Kathy here is jumping in and saying, managers are giving monthly feedback, but don't either because they feel they talk to them more frequently than once a month or fear of dealing with the employee. Just based on time, I'm going to jump over to the empathy and engagement section and just talk a little bit more around that. And here, Laura, I think I just shared a link as well in the chat to another article around assimilation within your company culture. And so kind of coming back here, talking about empathy and engagement, I mean, as HR professionals, I'm sure you've noticed, you're quite aware already, empathy really comes down to that understanding, responding to the emotions of others. And at the end of the day, we're really looking at, how can a leader cultivate empathy to help create that supportive environment where feedback is not just heard, but actually understood. I mean, there's nothing worse than providing feedback or letting somebody know how you're feeling about something and not really feeling heard or not really feeling understood. it really breaks down that psychological safety. And so we put together just a few tips or a few ways where HR professionals can help foster empathy in leaders. And again, at the same time, just based on what Kathy had mentioned, we don't have time for training. I don't need training, or, it's not something that's on my radar at the moment. In the coaching world, we have a saying like you can't coach somebody that can't be coached or doesn't want to be coached. And so at the end of the day, as HR professionals, you can only pave the way forward. It's up to the leaders and managers to kind of walk the line and everything else. But a few things that you might be able to do is look at things like promoting perspective taking. So encouraging leaders to view situations from the perspective of others. And so when they're bringing a challenge or problem to you, helping them flip the switch and get curious as to, well, how do you think this person's impacted by this? How are they showing up? Why are they showing up this way? Getting them to think a little bit more about their approach and how they're coming at things can really be helpful. It sounds silly, but encouraging active listening. We know we emphasize the value of active listening as a key component to empathy, but at the end of the day, this can look a little bit further in terms of even providing managers with the tools to ask clarifying questions. Like, what kind of clarifying questions can I ask employees to better understand them, or to ensure that I'm actively listening? So again, providing that training, that support can really help managers, foster that empathy. And within feedback, we can also look at facilitating cross-functional collaboration. And so creating opportunities for leaders to collaborate with colleagues from different departments or teams helps expose them to different perspectives, or even enhances an understanding of what is going on within various work experiences within an organization. We've talked about this, I think, a lot here already, providing resources, trainings, even assessments. I know at Tuity here we use both the DISC assessment for when we're looking at kind of communication and behavioral styles, and then we also use an emotional intelligence assessment for some of our leadership programs as a way of, helping just flag to leaders as to what are areas of growth within emotional intelligence that you can focus a little bit more on, and what is the impact on your team members if you're able to create greater empathy, for example. Otherwise, from here, recognizing and rewarding empathetic behavior. We talked about the same thing in terms of like providing great feedback. When you see somebody doing it right, actually rewarding it, acknowledging it in such a way that they're comfortable with. And lastly here, leading by example. I mean, as HR professionals, you can really model what empathetic behavior looks like within your own interactions with leaders and employees. And by leading by that example, it can help be a model for other managers within your organization. And so as we're looking to wrap up here, a few things that come up, around transformative leadership conversations. Employees want regular feedback. We know it, the studies say it. At the end of the day, employees at the core do, on the base, want to grow. They do want to know how they can do better, both for themselves, their role, their career, and their organization. Empathy within engagement, or greater empathy can actually lead to greater engagement as well. And so ensuring that, how do we help support leaders in being more empathetic can really help move things along. As HR professionals, you can be a champion for a feedback culture through your leaders and helping support them through that. And then lastly, providing tools, training, and coaching can really help set your leaders up for success around what are expectations for empathetic leadership. What are our expectations around feedback? How are you doing it? How is it aligned with our organization culture and goals and values? As we kind of bring things to a close, I did have one more thing I wanted to bring up, and it's a leadership development insight report that we started building out. And so as HR professionals, I'm sure you're already aware, employees don't quit managers, employees quit managers, not jobs. And studies show that about 57% of unhappy employees leave their job because of their manager. We also know turnover is costly. I know I'm preaching to the choir here. Turnover can cost anywhere from 150%, almost 200% of an employee's annual salary. And so it can be quite expensive when you don't have managers that, know how to provide effective feedback. When you don't have managers that know how to practice empathy with their employees, or, can't shift from focusing on the work that needs to be done to the person actually doing the work. And so what we did here, we started to build out, is actually just a calculator to help support HR professionals in being able to kind of share with their C-suite the cost of turnover, and more specifically, the cost of turnover based on ineffective managers, or if there's a leadership skills gap within your managers. And so I'm actually going to stop sharing this here. I don't think that changed for you. I'd like to get input, and it could be input from multiple people here. But what we're going to look at here is just building out this calculator a little bit. And so if somebody were willing to share, what number of employees do you have at your organization? And Kathy, maybe not yourself. I know you're a smaller team, so we're looking for somebody maybe over 100 employees, just to be able to kind of see what this looks like.
Yeah. I can jump in and use one of my clients.
Yeah, sure. Go for it, Alexandra.
Okay. 170 employees.
Okay.
Crap.
And it could be a round figure. It doesn't have to be exact.
Yeah. Okay, let's say 30% turnover.
30% turnover. Okay.
Yeah. Average salary, say 65,000.
Okay. Yep. So based on this, so we have 170 employees, 30% turnover, 65,000 is the average salary. And again, recognizing turnover is costly, costs about 150%. The net turnover cost for the organization per year is $4,972,500.
Sorry, I shouldn't laugh, but I can't wait to bring this number to the person that's running HR analytics with the client.
Yeah, the employee cost, so cost per employee is 97,500. And then recognizing that, we'll just use this number, that 57% of this turnover is actually caused by managers. That cost alone is $2,834,325. And so these aren't small numbers. I know my screen just changed there. I was going to bring this up here. And so if you're able to improve the management team just by 2%, it would save $100,000 annually in turnover costs for this specific client of yours. And so if you'd like, I know Alexandra, you did this for one of your clients. I'll actually share a link. Unfortunately, I just have it in the second slide here. I'll just share a link in the chat. What I've done is I've just made a 12-question kind of questionnaire that anybody from the webinar can fill out online. And then based on the information you provide, I'll actually create a custom calculator just for you, so you can have it for your client. Alexandria, I know you deal with multiple clients. Feel free to use the link a couple times. And what we can do is we'll actually take some time if you'd like afterwards. And I'll just do a quick 15-minute debrief with you. Be able to show you, hey, like this is the cost, this is what's showing up, this is the impact on the organization, and share some stats and information with you. And so if anybody's interested, feel free to use the link I just placed in the chat here. Ask, it's about 12 questions, takes about 3 or 4 minutes. And then I'll take the time to actually create your customized report and provide you that information so that, you can show it to your C-suite. And I know other HR professionals have said, I've never realized how much turnover is actually costing our organization. And these are big numbers. It's hard for them to kind of go unnoticed. So otherwise, as we're wrapping things up here, really appreciate the discussion that we had today. Thank you for everyone kind of sharing your own experiences and bringing things to the table. It makes these webinars that much more interactive and engaging for everyone as a whole. And so thank you for the work that you did today. Thank you for joining us. I'm more than happy to have you. We're doing these about every 2 weeks. We have a new webinar coming out on different topics. And so please feel free to come and attend the next one, or otherwise even share this with your colleagues, share this with other people in your HR network. We really get excited about helping support HR and leaders through our leadership development and training programs. So thank you so much for taking the time today. I'll stick around if anybody has any other questions. Otherwise, I'll send off a recording towards the end of tomorrow.